and I'm very grateful that I was invited to come along and join the Italians. It seems to be everybody here seems to be from UKZN, and I hope that you're not xenophobic. I did a study last year. It wasn't a longitudinal study, but we did 10 visits with an Italian scholar in a highly disadvantaged community, and it was a primary school, grade 7, and we were looking at cyberbullying, specifically bullying, and it's unbelievable the kind of findings that we got, because we thought that, of course, we didn't know too much about what happens with cyberbullying. Much of the literature was giving us what happens in advantaged schools, ex-model schools, children that have got smartphones, etc. And we were specifically looking at with a very poor community in Heidelberg. And we did write an article on it as well. Some of the things that we found was high levels of manipulation, using the cell phone, issues around stigma was coming out, issues around outing in terms of, say, sexuality, poverty, issues like hunger, like a child that didn't bring lunch, everybody else will like out her out, for something like not having sandwiches. Yeah. Of course, teasing was something that was quite common, and that was embarrassing them because they were able to use quite lousy names to tease each other. They were using cyberbullying to show anger, so it was not like physical violence, but it was more emotional violence and very high levels of verbal violence. And then the pictures. The pictures is interesting. It wasn't only sexting, because they were able to get genuine pictures, but they photoshopped it and they were sending it around. So there was high levels of the using of ICTs, etc. And classroom incidents were really blown out of proportion. So it led to silencing of voice. So because they were quite scared to say things because then it would go viral. And yes, of course, with children at the ages of 14, 15, gossip was very common. And this now, it's no more like verbal gossip, but it was gossip going as part of cyberbullying. Okay, enough of my story. That was my research. Welcome to all of you, special our guests, our host, Nhlanhla Gopal. Professor Gopal is from criminology. Thank you very much for hosting this. The grant is from the National Institutes of the Humanities and Social Sciences. It was a very generous grant. We are very grateful that our DVC for the College of Humanities is here, Professor Nhlanhla Mkhize. We have many colleagues here from the university, from different departments. There's Dr. Brett van Niekerk from computer science. I'm not sure if it's computer science, yes. Chantel Governor from Nedbank, Dr. Harold Patrick from forensics. If you can just put your hand up so people can see who you are. Dr. Monique Emser from politics. Captain K.V. Governor from the South African Police Services. Mr. Lee Swales from law. Zola Tonto from social work. And Dr. Trishana Ramlakan from law.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
It is my singular honor again to open this very, very important panel discussion this morning on behalf of the College of Humanities as well as the University of KwaZulu-Natal. I do want to begin by acknowledging Professor Gopal and also to thank her as well as all those who have been involved in the organization of this event. I also want to extend our sincerest Thanks to the NIHSS, the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences, for sponsoring the event, which also falls under the BRICS think tank, a special division within the NIHSS which is responsible for encouraging and building up South-South partnerships. So we do wish to thank them in absentia, but most importantly, I want to thank you individually. I'm not going to mention your names or where you are coming from. When I was sitting down, I was thinking, oh, well, maybe I must begin by acknowledging all the colleges that are involved from UKZN, but now I realize it extends way beyond UKZN, so I want to extend a special welcome to all of you, especially those colleagues who come from outside the university, as well as those who come from outside the province. Now, this is a very, very important event. There may be very, very few of us here, but it doesn't mean that what we are going to be doing today is small. We are venturing into new areas in cyber security as well as cybercrime, and it's very, very important that we as the country and as a continent are not left behind. When we are talking about cross-disciplinary or interdisciplinary knowledge that cuts beyond borders, beyond disciplines, this is exactly what is happening here. We have got computer science, we have got social work, we have got social sciences, we have got law, we have got engineering. This is the way knowledge is going to advance in the future, because there is no singular discipline or single human being who can address comprehensively the many, many challenges that have come about as a result of the dramatic changes in the information domain, including the fourth revolution. So from where I'm standing as a leader of the college, I do want to say we endorse what is happening here today. We also support it strongly. There are many, many colleagues who are doing excellent work in their very, very small corners, but they do not get an opportunity to be recognized. So we are saying this is a forum whereby we want to say we recognize all the excellent work taking place within the university. Now, I'm not really an expert in the field. I am a psychologist by profession, generically a social scientist, also interested in the sociology of knowledge. I do want to mention that as a university, we really need to look very, very deeply into this whole issue of knowledge production from where we are standing. The same applies to this particular topic of cybercrime and cybersecurity. We have got to look at it from where we are standing. In other words, over a period of time, especially as universities in the South, we need to radically shift the geography of thought. The geography of thought is nothing other than the dots on the map where thinking is being produced to influence world events. We have got to shift the geography of thought. Secondly, we have got to shift the biography of thought. Who is doing the thinking and on whose behalf? So I'm quite pleased today that we have got a very, very diverse group here, because it shows that we are actively engaged in shifting the biography of thought, because who controls the thinking and the production of knowledge, by extension, also controls the world. We cannot afford to be left behind as people located on the southern continents. I deliberately used he. It's not a mistake. Don't say, okay, he's not aware of gender issues. It's deliberate. He who controls the geography of thought controls the world. But we also need to look at the gender, the nature of thought. we need to be critically interrogating those areas. So this being a cross-cutting, new catalytic, or one of the catalytic projects of the NIHSS, which is meant to diversify the people who are involved in knowledge production, the epistemologies that come to bear when we are thinking about knowledge, is a very, very important project. So on that note, on behalf of the College of Humanities, as well as the University of KwaZulu-Natal, I do want to extend a very, very sincere, warm welcome, and also to wish you a very, very productive day today. I would have stayed if I had time, but unfortunately at this time of the year there are many pressing events. On that note, welcome and have a very, very productive day. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Chetty. First of all, I want to start off by thanking Prof. Mkhize. You know, usually events of this nature don't get blessed by DVC, so we are extremely fortunate that our DVC, sorry, we claim him, eh? Monique, you and I and Zola, we can claim our DVC. That our DVC has actually made time to recognize this particular project, so thank you very much, Prof. Mkhize. So in terms of this particular panel discussion, because I'm part of the NIHSS think tank group or academic forum on cybersecurity for about a year, I think now, almost a year, and we put our heads together and we said a panel discussion would be appropriate, and of course then we, because I've been working with some of the other colleagues for a while, really emerged with a good product today. Thank you very much.
Morning everyone. As you've just heard, my name is Lee. I'm a law lecturer in the School of Law. I'm also an attorney. I've only been an academic for about 4 or 5 years now. I was let's say a straight lawyer for the first 10 years of my career. So today, the purpose of today's presentation of mine is to look at South Africa's evolving approach to cybercrime. And I think just to give that context, I've been looking at these statistics for about 3 years now. I've been registered, I'm in my 3rd registered year at UCT for a PhD. I hope to finish in the next few weeks. So I've had a look at quite a lot of statistics relating to internet penetration. The inference being that if we're all accessing the internet, electronic evidence and cybercrime will become more prevalent. So I think that's the context within which we operate. So if you think about South Africa's poverty and South Africa's situation, it's quite remarkable that over half of our 54 million citizens have some form of access to the internet. That's as at December 2017 by Internet World Stats. When I first started my study, South Africa was sitting at about 22%. So in the space of 5 or so years, we really have seen enormous growth, particularly in mobile connectivity over the internet. I think most of us will understand and appreciate it's hard to go one day without using your smartphone, your email, internet, some form of technology. I've got 2 young kids and I can see already, compared to when I was at school, things are very different with the way that we interact, with the way that we learn, with the way that we communicate. Schools are turning paperless. Many offices are now foregoing printing and storing documents online. So document generation typically now happens electronically and no longer in paper form. So that's the kind of context. We really are seeing enormous growth in this environment. Insofar as cybercrime is concerned, our government first started taking this quite seriously in around March 2012 with a national cybersecurity policy framework. Since then, we've seen several developments. I won't dwell on them too long, and we don't really need to get into the definitions. But ultimately, what we're looking at with cybercrime is an illegal act or illegal acts that are committed using ICT or technology. That's effectively what a cybercrime is. We at this stage have a let's say a fluid legislative matrix. Today, as we stand, the applicable legislation is the ECT Act, Section 86. It's just go to it. Okay, we'll get there now. So we have I just want to give you some context on where we are. We have the ECT Act, and we'll get into those sections shortly. But we now see a cybercrimes bill. We're in the third draft of it. It's been around since 2015. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, Parliament's Justice and Portfolio Committee passed a new version of this bill, which has been passed by the National Council of Provinces, and effectively it's a formality now. It needs to go through 2 more stages, but then we expect that this will become law. The cybercrimes bill will become law in the first or second quarter of next year. What's the big change between the third version and the second version? Fortunately for me, I'm one of the persons on that panel acts as a moderator for me, so I've got some nice inside information there. Effectively, the second bill had quite a lot of government infrastructure, a 24/7 point of contact, and various other government nodes. Those were to be run by state security and police officials. The concern or the criticism was that we would have an overreach of state security, and certain bad actors might be able to, for example, effectively shut down freedom of speech and shut down various areas in the name of cybercrime. What then happened is that all the government structures were taken out of that bill. So the third bill really only deals with cybercrime, penalties, and search and seizure. That's effectively what it deals with. They've taken the government structures out. This they want to rush through Parliament. Well, not rush through, but we want to get this put through quickly. If the government structures were still in the bill, we understand that it would have been objected to, and this would have carried on and on and on. So I think this is a compromise bill in order to rush it through. Just by way of comparison, I've spent the last 6 months with an academic colleague from Nigeria. He's a solicitor there, and we've written a chapter in a book for some academics at UCT comparing South Africa's dispensation to the African Union framework. We've looked at Tanzania, Nigeria, and certain other African countries. Remarkably, South Africa's way behind, particularly Nigeria, particularly Tanzania. We haven't signed the AU Malabo Convention on Cybersecurity, and we've effectively just ignored this problem for 10 years. That's a bit like a toothache. You ignore it, what's going to happen? It's just going to get worse and worse and worse. That said, we are now dealing with it, and this new cybercrimes bill will hopefully put us on par with the rest of Africa and the rest of the world, and allow us to at least sign that convention and show an undertaking to take this issue seriously. Why all the fuss? Why we all hear what's the real issue? I think that if you look at it from a monetary point of view and a sort of effect on business point of view, in 2015 when this bill was released, the Department of Justice estimated that we lost 3.4 billion, with a B, 3.4 billion. We have an emerging middle class who've been targeted. South Africa's number 3 behind China and certain other parts of the world with cybercrime offences. The Department of Justice estimate that we lose R1 billion annually. I've tried to look at that data and how they get to it. It's a bit shady, it's a bit of a thumb suck, but look, it might well be in the right ballpark. So we've got a big problem. And according to our state security and police officials, we've got the 3rd highest prevalence of cybercrime behind Russia and China. And that between 80 and 84% of residents of South Africa have had some form or been exposed to some form of cybercrime. This last little bullet is startling, particularly if you've been watching shows on Netflix like Narcos. That cybercrime is bigger than the global black market in marijuana, cocaine, and heroin combined, all together. So I think that just gives you an indication of the growing problem. So how do we regulate it in South Africa? As I alluded to earlier, this is regulated by the ECT Act, the Electronic Communications and Transactions Act. Don't confuse that with or don't conflate that with the confusingly named Electronic Communications Act. That deals with broadcasting, that deals with spectrum and licenses and other issues. The Electronic Communications and Transactions Act has been called an omnibus act. It deals with lots of different issues. Electronic contracts, the validity of data messages, electronic evidence, cybercrime, and a raft of other issues. Unfortunately, when this bill was created, the Electronic Communications and Transactions Act, think back to the early 2000s, that's a long time ago now. My colleague there just told me I was in a words and ideas class with dreadlocks. Wow, I feel embarrassed. But that's how long ago that was. So we've moved on significantly since then, but I don't think that our law has. The other, I think, real indictment on our current position is that The ECT Act envisages a specialist called a cyber inspector. That cyber inspector is given a raft of powers insofar as search and seizure of electronic evidence is concerned. Since 2002, that's 16 years ago, we've never seen a cyber inspector appointed. Our Cape High Court in a recent case called S versus Miller, really you don't often see a judge, you shouldn't often see a judge attacking Parliament and others, but really took in his judgment, it just said that this effectively is a situation that we should not tolerate. We've effectively just ignored cybercrime for 15 years, and that's where we find ourselves now with quite a problem. So before the ECT Act, we had common law offences. I won't get into the law too much, but that could be, those are laws that are not written, so it's not a piece of legislation, it's passed down. So, for example, we had a case involving an IT specialist that worked at EdCon. There was an issue with the way that he left that business. He had a bug, I think he was terminated. The background facts aren't important. It's an unreported case. But ultimately what he did was, on a Saturday morning, he took down the whole of EdCon's IT systems, which resulted in them losing significant amounts of revenue. They tried to prosecute him on malicious damage to property in terms of his damage to the computer systems. So that's how we tried to adapt the law prior to the ECT Act, to take common law offences that were not really envisaged to regulate cybercrime, and we've tried to sort of pull cybercrime offences and fit them. Putting a square peg into a round hole kind of comes to mind here. So this is why it's really important that we have new cybercrime legislation that can give specific offences, can provide police officials with a correct framework in order to search and siege. That said, our justice system has successfully managed to really, I think, adapt current legislation. The Criminal Procedure Act, for example, has been used in order for police officials to search and seize, because the ECT Act is effectively useless. So going forward, once the new bill has been put in play, we might see more and more cybercrime prosecutions. I was talking to Brett just before we started. I've got 2 master's students. We're looking at cybercrime prosecution and regulation. We really are hard-pressed to find any existing cases. It's generally what we find linked to child pornography, and it's not necessarily cybercrime. So it's difficult to pin it as a cybercrime when the individual is not prosecuted as a cyber criminal. So what we are really, what the inference in that paper is that the lack of adequate cybercrime regulation, the lack of correct search and seizures led to a very low conviction rate. And that if we have the correct framework in place, we will see more convictions and hopefully a drop in these offences. I just had a little anecdote there for you that one of the so-called largest viruses was called I Love You, that preyed on the human condition. Because if someone sees an email that says I love you, most people think, oh, that's nice, let me click that. And it's caused significant damage, and it's said to have affected almost 10% of the global computers connected to the internet at that stage, which was the early 2000s. The offender came from the Philippines. There was no legislation governing cybercrime. So the offender effectively got away with it. They tried to prosecute him in terms of the common law, and he was effectively got away from being prosecuted because there weren't adequate laws in place. We have a principle in law that you can't prosecute some conduct if that law doesn't exist at the time. So let's say that we created the law a year after he did it. We can't go back in time and prosecute him for that. The law must be in place at that time. So that was a major problem. Many countries then followed the United Nations International Trade Group. They had, in 1996, released what was called a model law. Around 157 states have adopted this, and this seems to be the gold standard insofar as electronic communications is concerned. South Africa followed this guidance, as did many other jurisdictions, and our ECT Act is almost exclusively based on that guidance from the United Nations. Going forward, we're going to have the Cybercrimes Bill as the sole regulator. So today, as we stand, it's the ECT Act. By this time next year, maybe we have our second conference, the room's a bit fuller, I hope, and then we will probably be talking about the Cybercrimes Act, not the Cybercrimes Bill. That's what we expect. Having said that, I said that same thing last year, and we're still here with the bill. So who knows? I won't get into the sort of nuts and bolts too much and bore you to death with law. But in addition to the ECT Act, it's a complicated legislative framework. There's a variety of other acts you must look at. We heard from the moderator, the Prof earlier, about the Protection from Harassment Act. That's become a significant tool in your armory as a lawyer. I've managed to run at least 10 matters on the basis of that act and been successful. It's in the magistrates' court. It's a bit of a user-friendly type of approach as opposed to a very formalistic court process. You arrive at the magistrates' court, the complainant fills out an affidavit. In fact, you can write it in a normal affidavit and attach it to the form. Effectively, you've just got to show the court on a balance of probabilities that you are being harassed. The court will then give you interim relief. And then about 2 weeks later, you'll go back to court and you must argue why that relief should be made final or why it shouldn't be in place at all. So that really has been useful with online bullying, with people being harassed, with the way that social media has become a weapon. It's a useful tool. RICA, just dealing with monitoring and intercepting information, and then the Organised Crime Act is sometimes pulled in to take proceeds of criminal conduct that occurs online. And then the Film and Publications Act, which confusingly regulates child pornography. So you've got a matrix of legislation that you need to consider, there's some more there, I won't go through all of them. Criminal Law Amendment Act, that's going to regulate so-called revenge pornography. When a consensual couple maybe take a nude, and then we break up, and now I hate you, and it's not rainbows and unicorns, it's devils, and so I send your nude pic to all my boys' running club, and then someone else, and that's how it goes viral. So yeah, there's lots to look at, which is confusing from a legislative point of view. But primarily, if we're looking at hardcore cybercrime, we're looking at sections 80 to 84 of the ECT Act. I'll just give you a little snapshot of it there. So that's what it stands at the moment today. So if there was a cybercrime committed today, that's what we'd look at. Unauthorized access, interception, or interference with data, that's hacking, or gaining an unlawful access to a machine. Then there's extortion, fraud, and forgery, and then attempt. So if you attempt one of these, you can still be guilty of an offence, and then aiding and abetting and some penalties. Major criticisms of this act: no cyber inspector, the police aren't given the proper tools to do their job. The penalties are very soft. I can go down the hall here and steal a printer, an actual printer, and walk out and maybe get more prison time than I would if I committed some kind of cybercrime. That's just a ridiculous situation in 2018. What's going to happen going forward? We'll come back to these now. I just want to show you the cybercrime, the new bill. And we can maybe just focus on some of the issues. So that's the new bill. Straight off the bat, at first come to mind, two big changes come to mind. There's more detail in the offences. It's a more nuanced approach, reflecting an evolving position, which is incredibly important, because from a criminal law perspective, you have to prove things beyond reasonable doubt. You have to prove each element of the crime. That's difficult. Easy for me to stand here and say that. Very difficult in a court when I'm talking technical, and I have to then explain that in simple terms with a witness perhaps. It becomes problematic. That's one of the areas here that's difficult. So there's far more meat on the bone insofar as the offences are concerned. The other big change, which is an important one, is the penalties. And I'll look at the third change now, which is in Chapter 3, the penalties. We're going up to a maximum of 10 years instead of 5. So there seems to be I think an appreciation and acknowledgement that these are serious offences and shouldn't be just treated with a slap on the wrist. In some instances, they can be more serious than our so-called traditional offences. In addition, we've now got a section on malicious communications. That's really important in today's day and age. We've all got smartphones, and as Prof said to start, bullying is no longer confined to 8 to 2 when you're at school. Bullying is 24/7. Bullying happens continually. And this is an important tool. You'll use this, I think, in conjunction with the Protection from Harassment Act, but these will be very important tools in practice. And this could also be, I don't know if you saw a couple of months ago, I'm just thinking about this because it was also an exam question. You had this uproar about fake food, and there was a whole lot of, let's say, a whole lot of incitement on Twitter to go to these stores and to take vigilante action, and that's not a society based on a rule of law. Particularly when, in some instances, it is lawful to sell food that's expired, as long as you make it known. Certain foods, of course, produce, meat and fish and so on, you can't sell those once those have expired. But if I've got a can of baked beans and it was expiring in February, in fact, there's a business in Cape Town that this is what they do. They take the labels off, they repackage it, relabel it, and they sell expired food for far cheaper than you would get on the shelf. So I think that situation, for example, if it occurred now with this act in play, all those people who are posting those things and swearing and slapping and pulling food, they would be charged. I'm not aware of any charge against those persons at this time. And that, again, is quite problematic. So, look, there's significant improvement, in my view, with this act. As I mentioned earlier, I've managed to, with a colleague from Nigeria, analyze this law in comparison to the African Union's guidance, which is called the Malabo Convention. And this compares favorably to that convention. In fact, it's got more detail. So once this comes into play, in my view, we've also got the Protection of Personal Information Act, which the Malabo Convention deals with. We'll be able to sign that convention and ratify it. At this stage, we have neither signed it nor ratified it. So I think we're moving to a position where we will hopefully be able to enforce and prosecute cybercrimes more effectively going forward. The other important tool that this will provide our police officials is with the powers to investigate, search and access or seize. Wide-ranging compared to what we've got at the moment, where the police have to rely on the Criminal Procedure Act, and that act has been interpreted. You know, we're trying to, as I said, put a square peg into a round hole. Works sometimes, but not always going to work. This, once becomes effective, will really give the police every single ability to search, seize, access anything remotely related. You can do it on ex parte, which means you go to court without the other side knowing. You ask for a warrant, the court will give you a warrant. You must just be very particular in that warrant, what you're looking for and what you want. If the police official was confident that he would have got that warrant and that it would frustrate the search and defeat the purpose, go ahead without a warrant, as long as those requirements are met. So that compares favorably, in my view, to the Malabo Convention. There's also the only international framework we have on cybercrimes called the Budapest Convention. It was produced by an entity called the Council of Europe. This again compares favorably to that. Again, I feel that we'll be able to sign and ratify that once this becomes law. So the news is good at the moment, I think, because we seem to be going to our Department of Justice seems to want to get this through as quickly as possible. And there was significant concern and an overreach by state security and other actors, and those parts of the bill have been taken out, as I said. A new piece of legislation, probably next year, will be released, which deals just with that. So this bill will deal predominantly with cybercrimes and their definitions, penalties, search and seizure. That's really what we're looking at with this bill once it becomes law. It was approved by the Parliamentary Justice Committee on 7 November, and then it was approved further by the National Assembly on 27 November 2018. That's very recent. In fact, I heard on 5FM the other day there was an expert talking about it. Not so expert because they were calling the bill the Cybercrimes and Cybersecurity Bill. They were looking at the last draft. So before they went on radio, they probably better have looked at the most recent draft. So there is a change with between the new version and the old version. They're very similarly named. The second one is called B6 2017. This third one is called B6B 2017. They look very, very similar. The headings are the same. The name has changed. It used to be called the Cybercrimes and Cybersecurity Bill. It's now just called the Cybercrimes Bill. It will be called the Cybercrimes Act once it becomes effective. So that's effectively our regulation today, and I'm happy to talk about or answer any questions that you may have. Thanks.
I just make a comment. I actually investigate child pornography, and one of the serious issues that we have now is with penalties, because the courts differ greatly with the sentence. I'll use an example. In Pinetown, a Pinetown court has recently, the guy has had 1,500 images of child pornography. We followed procedures. The man pleaded guilty, got a fine and suspended sentence. Then in Durban court, a guy also same procedure, we arresting the 50 images to 5 years. Now it's a serious problem because the penalty clause is not included in the act. I don't know if that is being addressed. And also another thing that I have a serious problem also is with the ISPs. Child pornography is a secret crime. And it's difficult to find perpetrators, we get information. Now, also included in the law regarding the ISPs, they have a duty to prevent the hosting of child pornography in whatever ways. But we, the police, through other international organizations, there are software developed where we can identify when child pornography is forwarded via peer-to-peer networks and we get information. Now, I also think in law that something has to be done so that ISPs are held accountable when child pornography is accessed by the millions of people that are using the internet. I mean, it's something that we consider and we've got to do something about it because it's a problem.
I agree wholeheartedly with what you said there. I'll deal with the last point first. And I think a major problem has been because if you as the police service are able to identify and monitor this, surely as an ISP where you control the network, you've got that similar ability. For the most part, as far as I can tell in the research that we've done, there have been no prosecutions for ISPs for failing in that duty. We can't find any. And also what I mentioned to Brett earlier is that most of the time we can't see any straight cyber crimes in terms of 86, 87, 88. Most of the time it's child pornography or it's some kind of malicious communication and then it goes to the Harassment Act. So very seldomly do we see a prosecution for cybercrime. I think that has to do with the Act. Would you agree with that? Do you think that this will assist us going forward?
I think it's an act, but also, there has to be some kind of penalty because if somebody else can give me information, another country can find information that a certain ISP has allowed child pornography to be hosted to that site. Well, I mean, for the ISP not identifying that, that's how we need to find that.
It's reckless and it's not reasonable in the circumstances. But you did right. Penalties in cybercrime and particularly child pornography has been the biggest problem, is the penalties. It is being addressed to an extent. You see, the problem that we have is that child pornography is currently under you've got the Films and Publications Act and then you've got the Sexual Offences Amendment Act. So you've got two pieces of related legislation, and as you correctly pointed out, I've found in the few that I've looked at that the magistrates and or judges have taken a very lenient approach on this. And that they could be harsher, and that's maybe something that we do need to take up with the Department of Justice or perhaps I've spoken at a few, there's a group called SAGI, the South African Judicial Education Institute. I've spoken at a few of their events on cybercrime and that kind of regulation. Unfortunately, for 70-80% of our judiciary, this technology and these types of acts, for the most part, were something that they weren't familiar with, which is why SAGI was doing this training. And perhaps as society becomes more familiar with the problem and more alive to these issues, hopefully we'll see a sterner hand being put down. So I think there's two reasons for that. The Act maybe doesn't prescribe penalties that are harsh enough, and we could go further there. But there are penalties in play, like a suspended sentence and a fine is a joke. And the magistrate could have gone a bit harsher, but obviously elected not to. So I think it's a twofold problem, is that our judiciary needs to take a harder stance on this, on the one hand, and the Act probably needs to impose a more significant sentence.
But also that there are decided cases. So if the prosecutor produced evidence that state versus that a guy got 10 years, I mean the magistrate need to rule and say what? If we're caught in the same country as sentenced a guy for 10 images and got that sentence, you've got to follow the same rule of law, that because sure we are operating differently.
We are, and there's very few reported cases dealing with child pornography. There's a very famous one that was that law students use, that where the perpetrator tried to rely on his freedom of speech. That was obviously shut down and he lost that. But again, I found that his conviction, his ultimate sanction was very light. I haven't looked at that for a while. I think it was 2 years, maybe 3. It was something very, very light. For a significant part of a child pornography ring, I just thought that, you know, you could have beaten someone up out in the street and got something worse. So we do need to tackle that, I think. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lee. I thought that was very enlightening, especially for those of us who don't come from a legal background. So I think my understanding is that, and I'd like your feedback to it, is that we have the bill, but my understanding is that the judiciary is not in sync in the first instance. I think we're moving at different paces. And probably that's the reason why we're having the prosecution and the prosecution rates, etc., are not as large as, or to the extent that we'd like to see it. But I think in addition, then the question I want to ask really is, do you have any idea how quickly the judiciary is expecting to move to align itself with the bill? And do you think then that our judiciary personnel, will start to realize that cybercrime should not be confused and given the same penalties as other crimes? Is there a need for that?
Yeah, to be fair to the judiciary, they are taking steps. So SAGI's primary responsibility is to provide judges and magistrates with training on these issues. So my involvement over the last few years has been to train them on the ECT Act and its current provisions. When we go forward with the new bill, I expect that SAGI will have another round of these sorts of hearings. It's a very specialized and niche area which requires, I think, different knowledge from your normal criminal law judge. So I think it's awareness, I think it's training. But you're quite right, our judiciary normally, and that's probably why you hear the saying, the law is an ass, it takes a while to catch up to where society is at and what's actually going on. I think a large part of this for the first decade of the ECT Act's life is the fact that we didn't appear to take this seriously. We didn't appoint a cyber inspector, so there was no search and seizure powers. We sort of partially regulating child pornography in one act, a little bit in the other act. Now there's going to be some in here. It's a bit of a confusing hodgepodge situation. So the framework's not ideal, and I think the training needs to be escalated. But at least the Department of Justice has acknowledged this as an issue, has seemingly trying to rush this bill through, so that at least we're on a par with the rest of Africa. Because right now, not even the world, we're behind many African states, and that's a pretty sad situation for a powerhouse country like South Africa.
So my follow-up to you, Moderator. So my follow-on question is that, do you, from your experience, do you think a crime committed using technology should have a different sentencing or prosecution option to the crimes as we understand as normal crimes?
I think it has to, because, for example, let's look at hacking, which is the unlawful and intentional accessing of someone else's computer system or computer network. You would need, in criminal law, you have to prove each element of the crime beyond reasonable doubt. Sometimes it will be conceded, sometimes it won't. So you have a situation where, for example, I'll have to prove that that person access that network, that they did it knowingly. I don't have to prove that. That's where it becomes very difficult, because you are going to necessarily require experts such as Brett to come to court and say, this is what happened, this is how it happened, and in my expert view that they accessed the system, or they did X, or they did Y. So I think, yes, definitely you do need specific laws dealing with technology crimes. To an extent though, because there's still fraud committed on the internet. There's a common law fraud, there's still extortion. So what this act does is it sets out, for example, hacking And it also sets out new crimes, such as if I use a tool to try hack into someone's email, that's in itself a crime and a punishable offense. Okay, it's got a lower sentence than some of the others, but there are very specific and unique computer crimes. So police and justice will have the option. They don't have to use the Cybercrimes Act. So for example, if there's a fraud, they could go ahead and prosecute that in terms of the common law. But I find that generally there's been a lack of prosecution, perhaps because of a lack of understanding, a lack of awareness, and a lack of just, I think, taking these issues more seriously. That's been my impression. Of course, in South Africa, we've got a serious issue with resources, and we've got many other more serious problems. So as someone in government, you probably look at the Cybercrimes Bill and say, well, that's number 5 or 6 on my list. I need to deal with 1 through 5 first. That's maybe, you know, trying to be kind, but I'm not quite sure how we've got to where we are. But we are behind the 8 ball, and we do need to act quickly.
Just I promised my last comment. So I heard you say that if we look at, for example, the crime of fraud, and instead of, and it's a cybercrime offense, okay? But we decide that we will prosecute using what?
Common law.
Common law.
Common law.
Do you not think that it's doing exactly the opposite to what we really want to push for?
It might
and
be.
we want to say that cybercrime must get the kind of attention it deserves.
Sure. I hear what you're saying. I think though that if you look at South Africa's legal system, it's typically a statutory offence, like the Cybercrimes Act, or like some other act which sets out offence, maybe taking money out of the country, whatever it is, there's a statutory offence. So a written piece of law sets out what the offence is and sets out what the penalties are. If you can meet all those requirements, you probably go on the basis of a statutory offence. Might be easier that way. If I can't meet those requirements, maybe I can't prove an element of the crime, then I might go towards a common law offence such as fraud, extortion. I would probably though say as a prosecutor, I would be aiming, once this bill comes into play, to use that, to rely on that. But let's see, I think one of the maybe takeaways that we can look to do is to try, I think as a group of university academics, to try assist the Department of Justice and prosecutors and so on, and get an expert group together. I know that the African Union, the applications close at the end of October, are putting together an AU cybersecurity group. So they are looking, and I think South Africa should be looking to do the same, building infrastructure, building capacity, so that in 2 or 3 years' time, once the Act sort of, you know, it's starting to become a normal thing, we've got capacity. I think as we stand, that's one of our big issues, is we lack capacity and we lack the resources to fill that capacity.
Oh, thank you, Lee. Well, I'd like to move on. So, Brett, if you could do your presentation now, and then we'll break for tea.
Just notice something under cybercrime law. This computer might be illegal. We haven't had an activated software here, so Microsoft could be on our case very shortly around that one. That's what a cyber attack looks like. A bunch of dots on a map. Ultimately, you can't really tell much, but there are multiple things happening there. The US is getting hit, Brazil is getting hit, Spain is getting hit, and it looks like Hong Kong. The problem is, which one is crime, which one is terrorism, which one is a nation-state attack? I know for a fact the Spain one was anonymous, so it's hacktivism, it's somewhere between crime and terrorism and something else. It's one of those vague things. That was actually for supporting some of the separatists in Spain. They had the riots at the time. So ultimately they were protesting against what they foresee as heavy-handed tactics by the police in Spain. So there is some form of, to them, moral standpoint of what they're doing. So now the problem is, how do we actually go ahead and prosecute something like that when, as you can see, all the dots joining up into Spain come from about, I would suggest, over 20 different countries simultaneously. You don't actually know where the perpetrators are physically sitting. There might be multiple ones. Some may be unknowingly participating. So immediately things like some of the legislation and stuff might find itself in shaky ground. But the other issue is, how do you actually get to those people if you don't have that cooperation with the various countries? And that's again where things collapse very, very quickly, is that it just becomes too time-consuming and tedious to actually get to the perpetrators. So obviously there's a whole bunch of viewpoints around cybersecurity. So I'm just going to break it down into your technical aspects. So the guy sitting on the ground dealing with computers versus the one sitting at the top, be it executives in a corporation, the lawmakers, government, and so on. And obviously we've got the other issue. There's a lot of technology coming down the pipeline that there's a lot of unintended consequences, and we don't know how to deal with that yet. And obviously, as Lee said, the law's playing catch up. So by the time we got the first law going, the entire environment's changed already, so there's a whole bunch of new stuff. So if you look at the Cybercrimes Bill, whilst it allows for certain crimes, it doesn't take into effect that there's new technologies coming in which kind of alters how things will work. So I've already kind of mentioned that there's a bit of a disjoint between what your C-level, your executives are doing, what senior government's doing, and what's actually happening on the ground, the technical people. So it's fine pushing out laws, pushing out policies for a large corporation. But if you can't actually go and enforce those, they're meaningless. An example that we often use is that there's two countries in Southeast Asia, both have a death penalty for dealing drugs. One, you won't see drugs anywhere. The other, despite the death penalty, every single street corner's got a drug dealer because they can't enforce the law. Now the problem is, we've got the law, can we enforce it? Or can the criminals find the loopholes to get around that law? We also find a lot of people are, obviously for their own ego, try and keep up with catchphrases. And I've sat in conversations where, no, you cannot have that security capability because we are not a technology company. 5 minutes later, yeah, we have to keep up with the digital, yeah, that's why we need security in the first place. So clearly, the executives are in their own world, doing their own thing, and they do not understand the technical realities around them. And what's worse is, we've got the laws and the governance, but they do not understand their accountability. If a company is knowingly or unknowingly involved in something fraudulent or criminal, they will be the ones that will go to jail. It is their duty to know what is happening in their company. Ignorance is not an excuse. Either you might not be directly involved in the crime, but you still dropped the ball, you should be fired because you didn't perform your duty. And in Europe, a aircraft parts manufacturer, both the CFO and CEO got fired because they got hacked. The company lost the money, but they got fired because they did not fulfill their duties and ensure there was sufficient security. So obviously in Africa, we're way behind the ball there. We probably won't even know if we got hacked for a while. Currently, I think it's sitting at 200 days from actual penetration into the network to the time when you actually realize you've been hacked. Quite often, it is not your own guys that find out that you've been hacked. It's someone else pointing the finger at you from an external party. The other side, which Lee also alluded to, is from the technical side, we can have established processes, but if you don't have people understanding the terminology and how these things work, it's very, very difficult to motivate. Digital forensics is one of those that's a prime issue, is if your judges, your police, and so on do not understand the processes, the technology, they can make mistakes. So an example is investigators, I think it was a murder or a rape case, they had all the evidence they needed, but they made the mistake of plugging in a flash drive into one of the computers and looking through it before they had done the proper digital forensics procedures. Chain of evidence broken, case thrown out of court. And it was almost like a given, this guy was guilty. But because of a simple mistake like that, you got away. Then, as you say, if even normal police try and report a cybercrime, my DNS server got hacked by a denial of service attack, something like that. Majority of people are not going to be able to understand what you're saying, and it just becomes down to you have to sign an affidavit and try and find the right person who can understand what you're saying. I had an issue where I was getting a whole bunch of weird SMSs coming through, go to the police station. Where did you get the first SMS? It's like, I don't know. I was at this location when I saw it. I don't know where I was when it came through. No, you have to go report it at that police station. But cybercrime, most likely, is going to be international. So what happens if I was overseas when that SMS came through? Do I now have to travel all the way back overseas to report something happened? That understanding is problematic. One of the biggest issues we have as a security professional is that project managers drive us insane. They will literally, last minute, please check this for security. We go there, you've got this problem, this problem, this problem. Oh, no, you're just trying to derail our project. We're going to ignore you, and we're going to go ahead anyway. They need to kind of start learning, and some of them are not catching on. Security needs to be involved from the get-go. And that's to protect you against crime, against other malicious activities. Other things come through, we get weird comments like, it doesn't matter that information is open, we don't care if it gets hacked, anyone can have it. Like, but we're not worried about your information, we're worried about what someone else getting onto that system can do. We can break the system. So, because of Rika and Poppy, they now only think confidentiality. We've got technology coming in. Cool, we're going to deploy this new sensor out in the field somewhere to measure the power on a substation that's way out in the bush. We're going to use a SIM card to be able to get the data across. We can now apply. You've got a SIM card there, and people kind of think your Rika is only related to registering the SIM card. No, it's interception of information. So a large company, the university included, gives out email addresses to students. They allow the students to access the internet. We are a service provider. We have to comply with the intercept capability as outlined by Rika. Do we? I don't think we do fully. So that becomes a bit of an issue. Your basic kind of accountability and requirements that are required are not being followed by the people who set the policies and so on. Even your system developers, as I alluded to, do not really fully understand the security requirements. Obviously, then you start getting a mutual distrust between the IT and your security, your executives in security, because the executives sometimes also do weird and wonderful things. And I've literally had the cases where I've had to put my foot down when I was in the industry and tell the executive, no, you are not going to do that because you will break the entire network. Unfortunately, a few weeks later something did happen, and because they listened to us eventually, it was protected. Another side is we have a number of consulting companies, auditing firms and so on running around marketing, again using a catchphrase, we do cybersecurity marketing stuff, when they don't fully understand the technology and what they're supposed to be doing. And they're also kind of cheeky. It's the case that they'll come and audit you and tell you should be doing X, Y, and Z. When they're now involved in the project, they don't do that themselves. But we're wearing a different hat at the moment, it doesn't matter. No, you're going to audit us 2 weeks down the line, you must comply to your own things. And then obviously the journalists also get hold of phrases. And the one I hate the most is hack attack. As soon as something's on the internet, it's a hack attack. It's like, no, nothing got hacked, don't worry about it. There's that sensationalism, the incorrect terminology. So now as a security professional, there's this misconception out there. And again, dealing with the boards and the executives, suddenly we get pushed out, there's a report, how secure is the company based on this report? And then the auditors get hold of it, and we protect against this aspect and that aspect and so on. And when we got the auditor's report, again, it was a case of these guys are talking absolute rubbish. again, Lee correctly put out, skills is going to be an issue, and this is going to be the fundamental part. The main focus tends to be on the technical skills. How do we go securely configure something, which is important. The issue that people, or the major misunderstanding is security is technical. So what they'll do is they'll get your administrators, they'll go and throw money and buy technology like you won't believe, but if the person configuring that technology does not know what they're doing, there's going to be holes in it, and it's going to be dangerous. So that's one of the largest issues. The other main focus becomes business risk. How do we include cybersecurity into your business risk? And quite a larger proportion of cybersecurity work in industry is actually risk management. But on the other side, how do we handle the national aspects? Okay, one company could be hacked, but it's part of something bigger. If you look at some of the major cases that were happening in the US, we think China and Russia, but it was multiple defense companies being targeted. But it was a step-by-step. They targeted one of the security companies, broke something they thought was completely unhackable, used that then to target the defense companies. So if you individually go through each company isolated, you're not going to see the bigger picture.
Chris, I just wanted to add and get your view on something you might have seen recently at those of the UKZN. We often get these emails in our inbox about spam. We get hacked probably once a week. But that seems to me, sort of see what do you think about that? Is that why we're getting hacked? Because we effectively walk outside of Niekerk.
What I think is happening with the university network is, a university is kind of unique in terms of our clients are inside the network. Most normal companies, your clients are out there. You can maybe give them some kind of limited guest access on a Wi-Fi or something like that, but normally you don't have 15,000 clients sitting inside your network. So the problem is new students come in, they're blissfully unaware of what they're doing. As you say, technology is being rolled out, just internet penetration, access, but that means that people who have never come across the internet suddenly have access to the entire world there. They might not be used to those kinds of scams. You come from a small rural village, doesn't matter where in the world. It's very close, you know everybody, there's no secrets, you can trust them because they'll get caught out very, very easily. Now you're suddenly exposed to this broader world where 99% of it is absolute rubbish. You're going to say, okay, my bank thinks this, I'm going to click here. So what's happening is one student their account gets compromised, that account is then used to send out the next round of spam emails, someone falls for it, that one account is now used for the next. So it's just a perpetuating thing. My biggest concern is, I know the technology that we've deployed, I have used that exact same technology in larger corporations. It should be able to block those kinds of emails. For some reason it isn't. Again, it goes down to configuration. So maybe there's a specific aspect of that thing that we have not subscribed to, but I know for a fact that that technology is actually so advanced that it would look at the emails and say, okay, it says it's coming from a UKZN address or a whatever address, but in fact, it's coming from outside the network. So that's suspicious. Why is something coming from somewhere else but using our address? Immediately we'll flag it. So we should be using that kind of technology to look at what are the catchphrases, because if you look at the emails, similar wording over and over again. Try and block those catchphrases in the email. What's very annoying is when a student actually replies to your email and that goes into junk. That gets blocked, but the scam isn't getting blocked. As for the POPI training, there were issues, and I think most people who have interacted with that will know what those issues are. I won't go into too much detail here. Those are the kinds of challenges we are facing, is that, again, stuff becomes like that POPI training is a checkbox exercise. We have to do it, so let's just roll something out to say we've done it. The fact is whether it was effective or not needs to be measured. So there's a whole bunch of other governance that actually has to happen around that, which we don't have visibility of. And it might be a good idea for transparency's sake that we do get visibility around that, because one of the key things that we use to test skills is actually sending out fake emails to see how many people will click on it. The very worrying part sometimes is that even after you say, by the way, this is a test, people are still clicking on the link. So clearly they don't read things properly. From the academic side, obviously we all academics, or most of us are academics, doing the research. What we're also finding is sometimes, with cyber is disruptive, just the very nature of it. And you sometimes can't use the very old school way of doing research. It's gonna change. Cybersecurity and just the cybercrime, even if it's a nation state sponsored activity, is based on deception. So getting people's opinions is no longer as strong as it used to be because it's based on deception. So we haven't been hacked. You might not have been hacked, you just don't know it, and you might not know it for about another half a year. It's one of those challenges we find. The international collaboration, we spoke quite a bit about what's out there. There is collaboration, there's all these model laws and things, but where's the action on the ground? We're still struggling to see that. Again, different countries, different laws, different tweaks. We haven't actually come across the fact when you deal with your international cooperation, if you need to get to someone on the other end of the world, if you go through Interpol or one of those, is it actually fast enough? If that guy's skipping countries like you won't believe, maybe by the time you get into Eastern Europe or wherever it is, he's gone somewhere else, covered his tracks and destroyed all the evidence. Whose laws take precedence? Do you have to take all laws into precedence? Where's the victim on the perpetrator side? This is one of the challenges, and why Eastern Europe's also always pinged for being the hacker haven, is that the laws there are not actually taking hacking as a crime. So now we can't prosecute on that side.
And also, Brett, just to add there,
could you just let Brett finish first?
So obviously the skill differential between countries and so on becomes a problem. You start finding countries might look down on each other because of that skills differential. So just some examples of what's happening I'll go through fairly quickly. As I said, talking about technology, a fridge can literally send scam emails out. What's happening? You can hack road signs for political messages. Might look like fun now, but there's been cases in the US where people have hacked the tornado warning sirens. So in the middle of the night, these things suddenly start randomly going off. That causes mass panic. You're obviously half asleep, suddenly these things going off for no random reason. Now, one of the days, suddenly there's going to be a tornado, and people think, oh no, this thing's going off again, and we're going to ignore it. That Mirai botnet, that literally took Liberia off the internet. It was also responsible for taking down most of Europe and social media in the Americas. So what do we do with all these things that we connect? And literally it comes down to you have to provide cyber security for something like a toaster. And there is now a connected mousetrap, so you might want to provide security for your mousetrap. A casino in the US was hacked through their fish tank. Social media. Again, human stupidity. If you give out the information, that's your own problem. Now, we dealt with cases like this. Is Facebook default, if enough people check in at a certain location, it's going to create a Facebook page there. So suddenly we're now dealing with hundreds of Facebook pop-up pages for our facilities that are non-official because people, oh, I might work at this location. So hey, cool, company's got a location here, there, everywhere. Now we have to troll through Facebook just trying to shut down all the pages. Legitimate activity, but you can imagine if you are doing sensitive work, suddenly some of your not so publicly known facilities become known. Cloud security concerns, you're not worried about data security, you're worried about a thunderstorm. And I literally get asked the question, so is cloud computing really up there in the cloud? I got asked that twice already. Once 2 weeks ago. Big data, again, we've got all this data, we don't know what to do with it, and executives favor saying, we've got this data, let's put it to use. You need to know what the question is before you can provide an answer to the question. They seem to think, hey, cool, there's technology, we'll throw stuff at it, and it will answer the meaning of life. It's not going to happen. So yeah, there's obviously disjoints between the technology side, what we can, as technical practitioners, can do, and what people are making up some weird laws. So the obviously one of the politicians, yeah, let's shut down Twitter because we don't like what people are saying. That's not so easy, not so technically effective from a national perspective. The skills focus probably not really ideal in this country, which is causing part of the problem. So when it comes down going to court, trying to do an investigation, because I've had to trace back certain things. Fortunately, because I know where the law line is, I knew where to stop, and it said lawyers for the company now take over, whether they actually followed it. But then also back to things like trying to investigate child pornography. When the FBI deals with certain things like that, is the techniques they used are identical to the hackers in the first place. So by our law, what they did was illegal. To be able to break into that child pornography, they literally hacked it. So your law ultimately becomes illegal, which is part of the truth. And then obviously the technology side, you're getting new terminology, new things coming out. By the time we've got the first set of laws ready, how do we deal with the next lot of technology? 5 years down the line, once we figured that one out, technology's changed.
Thank you, Brett.
Is it, like, do they consider that all these cybercrimes are human related, as in humans do the cybercrimes, they commit the crimes, they're the ones who manage the security systems, but it feels as though most of the laws or the regulations that are passed are focused on the cyber as opposed to who's doing it.
Cybersecurity is human through and through. Going back to like a military concept, you had like different operating domains of land, air, sea, space, and so on. Those are all natural, they're naturally occurring. You can see them and touch them. Whereas cyber is man-made. We created the rules, we created the protocols, how it works, and this is the problem. We can change it when it doesn't suit us. So that there is no physical law which is bounding what we can do. We manipulate some of the physical laws for like Wi-Fi and so on, but there's still at that physical point of the internet, that's where it ends. The rest is all human construction. And you're kind of correct that, and I think this is one of the challenging points they're going to find in the cybercrimes bill. And my biggest problem with having state security involved there was no escalation and de-escalation. State security shouldn't really be dealing with a case of someone sent around his girlfriend's news because he was upset. That's not a state security issue. So why are they convening a council that oversees all cybercrime? Let the police deal with that one. Let the state security deal with trying to identify the one that's actually a state hacker. The problem is the techniques that are used are identical the whole way through. Last year, those 2 massive viruses that went around, that was American military technology that got leaked. And someone modified it and used it for, then at first thought it was a cybercrime thing, then later they started pinpointing maybe it's North Korea and Russia. So it could be nation-backed. But there's no ways to distinguish based on what was technically happening. I think that's where law's going to fall flat as well. So again, deception becomes part. Okay, cool, internet service providers should be able to mandate or have visibility of child pornography. But if I can hide the child pornography, so it looks like I'm downloading something else, how far must those ISPs actually go? To a point that it's actually an invasion of privacy now, to be able to identify what it is. Now, are you going to monitor every single person and actually go in detail in their emails and check every single picture that's gone through? Because the picture that you see in front of you is not the picture I'm getting. I can hide something within that picture. Deception is key. And this is where I think law is going to struggle, is that they haven't learned to deal with that deceptive capability.